Good morning, everyone. We are going to do a review today on the life of Thomas Jefferson as a Jesus words only enthusiast, a person who was anti Paul at the same time. And this came up today. Johnny Genlock wrote me and he said, "Are you going to go into any of the others on your list?" I've listed out famous Jesus words only enthusiasts, anti Paul people, and that included the person we were reviewing, Leo Tolstoy, but Thomas Jefferson was there, and he says, "Really interested in what you might say about Thomas Jefferson, for instance." So I didn't give it much thought, and I just said, "Well, I'm interested in that too. We'll see how that goes." And then within an hour, I mean, literally, I just copied this from less than an hour ago. He sent this to me, and I already had finished looking into it. It just popped up on a screen I was looking at, and I saw Thomas Jefferson. I clicked the button, and I had actually written an article on the Thomas Jefferson Bible, and so I thought this has got to be a God thing, so I better do it. So I hope Johnny, you're gonna realize God moves in mysterious ways. So thank you for your comment. So anyway, we know Thomas Jefferson will be memorialized because his face is on there on the Mount Rushmore. And can you guess which one it is? Is it the guy on the right or the guy on the left or one of the guys in the middle we haven't looked at? Well, it's this guy right here. Thomas Jefferson is right there. So he's going to be famous. This is a picture at the White House, the official webpage for Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States. And a really remarkable beginning of our country. George Washington, a great military mind. John Adams, one of the important political founders. But Thomas Jefferson is, to me, well beyond great in terms of his abilities, knowledge, skills. I mean, he had an amazing skill set. He could speak. He studied Greek, Latin, French. We'll see why that's important. He extracted Bible extracts from Greek, and from Latin, besides English and French, to make up his Bible of the words of Jesus. And so that just gives you a little idea of who he really is. He was well educated in law. He came up with the idea of freedom of speech, religious liberty, all kinds of things that he invented really almost by himself in the Virginia legislature. And you can see he was moving in those directions. Well, let's read his biography. Thomas Jefferson is a spokesman for democracy, was an American founding father, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, 1776. So one of the most important documents of history is this man's work, his writing. And he was the third president of the United States, served 1801 to 1809. And this is interesting. In the party, this is the official White House page, and I'm sure this doesn't change based on administrations. I pray to God, no, they don't rewrite history every time some new president comes there. So I think this has been there for a long time. In the thick of party conflict in 1800, Thomas Jefferson wrote in a private letter, quote, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. Oh, do we need you now, President Jefferson? Please help us. We're really in desperate straits with our so much censorship going on in this country today." Anyway, he studied at the College of William and Mary. He read law. He got married. At 33, he drafted the Declaration of Independence. How many people have that on their resume? In years following, he later make its words a reality in Virginia. Most notably, he wrote a bill establishing religious freedom enacted in 1786. So I think that's prior to the Bill of Rights, which enacted in 1789, if I'm not incorrect. So he was way ahead of his time in that respect. He became influential in what's called the Democratic Republicans. So it's hard to say which party that became. They had, you'll see his principles could be, which, tell me which party today has more of his principles. Well, anyway, here's what it says. Jefferson assumed the leadership of the Republicans, the Democratic Republicans, who sympathized with the revolutionary cause in France. Attacking federalist policies, he opposed a strong centralized government and championed the rights of states. So where would he sit on the modern spectrum? He would be sitting with the Republicans of the recent era, and then sometimes he might be on the Democratic side. So politics have shifted over time So just to show you, he would have been considered a by being pro France, he was maybe more liberal democratic, but because he was in favor of a strong central government, but still there was state rights. Wait, excuse me, he was opposed to central government. Excuse me. Well, then he would be much more. Isn't that a Republican view? So I would say he's more of a Republican, and he's championing the rights of the states. That would seem to be more of a Republican view. Okay, so you can see very, very complex person here. He was a reluctant candidate for president in 1796. There was a vote, got stuck between him and Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr became the defeated candidate because Hamilton, who was the Federalist leader, he got everybody to vote for Jefferson in that runoff there. Now, listen to this political program. Jefferson assumed the presidency. The crisis in France had passed. He slashed Army and Navy expenditures, cut the budget, eliminated the tax on whiskey, so unpopular in the West, yet reduced the national debt by a third, and so on. And then he bought the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon in 1803. So he sounds very fiscally conservative. So, nowadays he would be a Republican, even though most people would view him as having Democratic leaning. So, this just to show you the way politics have changed over time. He's more. He would look very conservative by today's standards. Like we're not going to spend ourselves into debt, are we? Where are we now? $34 trillion debt. How are we ever going to pay that back? I just wonder. Okay, during Jefferson's, and we're borrowing from a bank called the Federal Reserve. We're made to believe it's part of our government, but it's technically not. So we actually do owe this money. So are we going to default? Anyway, I digress. During Jefferson's second term, he was increasingly preoccupied with keeping the nation from involvement in the Napoleonic Wars. So he's trying to keep us out of war. What's the current policy of every administration? Let's get to have more war. So he'd be like completely considered an isolationist by today's standards. And what's interesting is he died on July 4, 1826. He died on the birthday of our country. That's kind of poetic. All right, and he wrote a book that got published later in 1904 called The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, extracted textually from the Gospels in Greek, Latin, French, and English. His name is on it, but the way it got there is important. So before I read to you the next panel, I just want to say the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to show you his view about Paul first, which is really one letter, and then we're going to go into his rest of his correspondence, and you're going to see that his motivation isn't just to eliminate Paul, it's to focus on Jesus and get Jesus's words out to the public because he felt these were like precious jewels, and that's the way we should feel. And so when people try to pin you down and say, hey, you're all about hating Paul or not liking Paul or whatever, say no, 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 we are trying to promote Jesus because that is the truth. And so you're going to see here's a man passionate for Jesus' words only, literally, and he's also very aware of what Paul represents against Christ. So let's see what he says. We're going to start with his quote on Paul. It's the only quote I'm going to have. I separate, therefore, the gold from the dross. So what he's telling someone, his project with putting Jesus' words into a Bible. To restore to Jesus, the former, and leave the latter. So the former is gold, and he wants to leave the dross behind. To the stupidity of some and roguery of others of his disciples. He's talking about some of his disciples are stupid and some are rogues. Of this band of dupes and impostors, Paul was the great Coryphaeus and first corrupter of the doctrines of Jesus. He continues, these palpable interpolations and falsifications of his doctrines led me to try to sift them apart. I found the work obvious and easy, and that his past composed the most beautiful morsel of morality which has been given to us by man. The syllabus is therefore of his doctrines, not all of mine. I read them as I do those of other ancient and modern moralists with a mixture of approbation and dissent. Introduction, and here we're going to actually get more quotes of Jefferson on what is his purpose, how does he view Jesus, and he'll talk indirectly about Paul in the sense that he'll be saying, I'm going to be taking out things that I don't think are authentic. So anyway, it turns out the Jefferson Bible, it's currently marketed or was created in 1904 and titled by the U.S. government "The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth," extracted textually from the Gospels in Greek, Latin, French, and English. Now, what happens is it became an inheritance basically of the U.S. government. So it was transferred to us. So it's now owned by us. And that happened in 1895. It now is the property of the United States National Museum at Washington, having been obtained by purchase in 1895. And what really happened is these manuscripts came to their attention. They were inside of a bunch of uh, Jeffersonian materials that someone had bought, a doctor had bought, and didn't really know what he had there. And in there were 2 volumes that were like, they look like New Testament, bound in folio and everything. But this was these Bibles that Jefferson had created and was hoping to publish, as we'll see. And they had the title we see today, The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, and so on and so forth. And I want you to notice this is somebody who knows Greek, Latin, French, besides English. So that tells you we have to start getting better again, America. We have kids who don't learn anything about Greek, don't learn anything about Latin, and it's a shame. We should know that. And of course, we should always have another foreign language in our ability. So it's good to learn foreign languages, and it helps particularly to do studies of history and studies of the Bible. And so um, this is the introduction. The morals and life of Jesus of Nazareth, extracted textually from the Gospels in Greek, Latin, French, and English. The title and very full index in his own hand. So he's saying what we found on this Bible. The texts were cut by him out of printed copies of Greek, Latin, French, and English testaments and pasted in this book of blank pages. So it was a nice folio, meaning a leather bound looking thing, but the pages were all blank, and he would paste them in so that he was building a Bible that some publisher could take it and then republish it by typing up everything that's on the pages. Which was handsomely bound in red morocco, ornamented in gilt, and titled on the back in gilt letters, The Morals of Jesus. So he indicates later that he would read this for his own edification whenever he wanted to. So this was like his little pet book. His original idea was to have the life and teachings of the Savior told in similar excerpts prepared for the Indians, thinking this simple form would suit them best. And I want to comment here is so one scholar, I think his name is Barton, he comes out and says this was intended to be given to the Indians, and then Throckmorton apparently poo-poos that. Well, I just want to show you this is not the first time this is going to be mentioned in the opening introduction by the official government publisher that he was doing this to basically evangelize Indians. And I think the Throckmorton person wants to downplay any evangelistic attitudes of Thomas Jefferson, as if he planned to only have this book in his possession. But we're going to see he's always trying to prepare it for publication. But he's a very busy man. He's been president for 8 years. He's got a lot of other things on his plate. And this gets to the back burner. And we're going to see he's going to try to ask Joseph Priestley, a famous theologian, can you finish the project? And he's relying upon him. And then Priestley dies. And then the project has to be revived, and that's, apparently, obviously, he didn't get it done, so that it just didn't happen. He died about 12 years after Priestley, so he had some time to do it, but he never got it finished. I'm sure he did the best he could. But abandoning this, the formal execution of his plan took the shape above described, which was for his individual use. So he was still using it. And lots of us can have things that we would create as our own little reading material that we would find a favorite reading material. But his objective was always to turn it into a publication for others. He used the 4 languages that he might have the text in them side by side, convenient for comparison. So that means, again, he knows Latin, he knows Greek, he knows French, he knows English. I mean, This is the level of education of this man. We need to have people who we need to encourage our younger generations to study these foreign languages, because this is the language in which the Bible was written in Greek. Well, most of it was written in Greek that we care about. And then there's the Latin language, which is where it was translated into, which causes a lot of confusion if you don't know Latin, because the Latin Vulgate had an extraordinarily out of proportion effect on the canon as it grew, because once it was changed in the Vulgate, the Greek text would be made to conform. And so the only way to know that that's true is you have to know enough Latin to know that there's changes being made in the Greek that now conform to Latin and no longer to the Greek. So see, those are the kind of things that knowing both languages would help. I'm just saying this is a great testament to the level of education we used to have in our country. We need to get back to it. In the book, he pasted a map of the ancient world and the Holy Land with which he studied the New Testament. I'm going to take. Okay, and this is kind of an interesting thing. This is how this whole thing came up. Is so these books get lost basically, uh, and then the person who's writing this introduction is going to explain how he got involved. In 1886, I was engaged when a fellow at Johns Hopkins University in cataloging some small, valuable Hebrew library gathered together by Dr. Joshua Cohen. So he's in there. He's working to put all that together, and in there, amongst that, is 2 copies of the New Testament mutilated, the ones we're talking about, which contain the inside of the cover of a newspaper slip giving the account of what Jefferson had undertaken and referring to a letter to John Adams dated October 13, 1813. This guy must have thought I went to heaven, like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing Americana in person, up front and close and personal. And then followed in that is that this person, who's writing it, it's a letter to Thomas Jefferson. All right, but he's going to indicate that Joshua Cohen leaves a note of how he obtained these Bibles. This and the corresponding volume are the identical copies alluded to in the above article. And so there's an article attached talking about this project. They were purchased by me at the sale of Dr. Macauley's medical library, to whom they had been bought at the sale of Mr. Jefferson's library. So Mr. Macaulay buys them, then Mr. Cohen obtains them. So there's some transmission going on. So this is the introduction is trying to draw a line so you can see this is truly coming from Jefferson through these different hands. And then one of the title pages is described for our reference, so we know, and it appears that uh, the title page gives you the title of an 1804 Bible. So that makes me think that this isn't what can I say? It's never explained. Is this the book that was being created and a publisher drafted this title page out for him? And did he print a book attached to it? He's never really clear about that. So I'm going to just say I don't know what he means by this. But it appears there's a title page that exactly matches what was the draft page of Jefferson. But now you can see a publisher at the bottom, Jacob Johnson and 1804 on it. And then somebody communicates to this author, who's the introduction, who says that the idea, and this is someone intimately familiar with Jefferson in person, says that the idea Jefferson had at first was to compile a book which would be valuable for the use of the Indians. So there it is a second time. So again, apparently Throckmorton wrote an article recently where he's trying to be dismissive that Jefferson had any evangelical purpose. So thinking that he's evangelical will make them think, well, then he's going to be a true Christian. Well, who would do that unless he's a true Christian? So I'm kind of come around to that Jefferson's a real Christian. He's just not a Christian who conforms to standard operating procedures. All right. And then on April 9, 1803, he wrote from Washington to Dr. Priestley. This is important because it turns out that Dr. Priestley is the person he's going to actually come to trust as the one who's going to carry forward this project, because he's too busy. And so they're referring back to Priestley was working on a project where he would compare Socrates to Jesus. And then he's talking about a conversation with Dr. Rush in 1798 and 99, where he promised to someday write a letter giving his view of the Christian system. So Jefferson is trying to get people to state for him what is your view of the Christian system, because he wants maybe he's trying to work on a preface to this New Testament. We don't know, but it sounds like that. He's trying to gather information that someone who's trying to write authoritatively on something wants somebody who's much more knowledgeable than himself to write some introduction. So that seems to be what's going on, in my opinion. It was evident, the introduction continues, it was evident that he considered the Gospels of having much extraneous matter, and that by careful pruning, there could be selected out those sayings which were absolutely the words of Jesus himself. So he was obsessed with getting rid of the interpolations, the additions that could be determined. After discussing the injustice done by these later additions, he says to Priestley, quote, "You are the person who of all others would do it best and most promptly," meaning put this together. "You have all the materials at hand, and you put together with ease. I wish you could be induced to extend your late work to the whole subject." So he's trying to get him to agree to the whole project. And this is a letter of 1803. Okay, so then in a letter of 10 days later, April 19, 1803, to Edward Dowse, Jefferson writes that he considers, quote, "the moral precepts of Jesus as more pure, correct, and sublime than those of the ancient philosophers." Okay. And then I'm going to I'm just trying to skip along here and show you just the highlights. Um, and he's basically saying, I don't like to tell people about my religious views because then, it's going to create controversy. Um, and what he doesn't want to do is he doesn't want to have his free speech infringed. And, but, if but and in order to do that, you have to resist invasions of your own free speech, because then the temptation is to abridge somebody else's free speech. So he's actually thinking part of the freedom of speech is not to have to say something that you don't have an obligation to declare. So that was another way of looking at things. He did that. But I like the way he said this word here. "It behooves every man who values liberty of conscience for himself to resist invasions of it in the case of others." So you don't go in and you meddle in somebody else's beliefs and try to, get them punished or censored, if you will. Or the case may, by change of circumstances, become his own. So when you interfere with somebody else and trying to, suppress their speech, have some government come in and stop them from talking or doing something, but ultimately it may end up you're going to be in the same spot where you're going to have the government coming after you. So if you don't want it to happen to others, don't do it to them. Okay, so then let's see here. And then what's interesting is he got John Adams, who I think is President Adams. He got him to uh, engage with him on the same project, and they were working together now on making this Jesus Bible. And so he downplays it, the guy introducing this, but if you put it together, that's what it's saying. In July 1813, Adams reminds Jefferson of his intention of preparing the work, which he, Jefferson, had handed over to Priestley. So Adams is not directly hands-on, but he's engaged enough to say, hey, how's this project going? Almost like he's a friend trying to shepherd him back to this project of getting the Jesus Words book done. He writes, Adams does, "I hope you will still perform your promise to Dr. Rush. If Priestley had lived, I should certainly have corresponded with him." So Adams is saying, we've lost Priestley. Remember, you're going to have, you wanted to work with Dr. Rush and you promised him something. It's not clear what that was, but Dr. Rush was to basically prepare that summary of the Christian system. So obviously Jefferson wanted to put that in the introduction, saying, here's the Christian system as I view it, basically having Dr. Rush create that preface. So I'm just conjecturing a little bit there. All right. Then in 1813, Adams writes Jefferson, and he gives a description of the volume, and he talks in the voice, meaning we are working on this project together, this Bible. "We must reduce our volume to the simple evangelists, select even from them the very words only of Jesus." Do you realize John Adams now is totally in on this project of a Jesus words only Bible? And he wants the simple evangelists. He doesn't want Paul either. So John Adams, you could put also in the same camp with Jefferson. It's just I've never heard of him being involved before. So that's why reading this introduction was really eye opener for me. pairing off I don't even know what this word is. This shows you these people studied it. Amphibologism, in which they had been led by forgetting often or not understanding what had fallen from him, by giving their own misconceptions as his dicta, and expressing unintelligibly for others what they had not understood themselves. So John Adams, a president of the United States, was saying he thinks that sometimes the apostles or somebody else interpolated words that were unintelligible, uh, as if they were coming from Jesus, and put them into the gospel. So he's part of the same project of trying to prune out those things that appear to be observations by the apostles or by some really third party or whatever. You have to remember, we have had so many corruptions taken out of our Bible. 'Cause I mean, there's still a lot there, mostly all Trinitarian. I mean, the wording and changing, and I mean, even today, people are still. I keep telling them the word worship is not the word that is translated. It's translated as worship, but all it is proskuneo, which means kneeling. And they come back, but wait a minute, it shows in all these editions, they all agree it's worship, worship, worship. I said it's mind reading. It's mind reading. They don't know. They're trying to make you think people are worshiping Jesus as God. The word just means kneeling in front of somebody. It could be just for pure homage. So we still have the corruptions going on, ladies and gentlemen. And can you imagine how much more corrupt it was back then? And they're saying, hey, something's wrong here. People are not worshiping Jesus. There's got to be something wrong, but they have to dig in the Greek, and they're digging in the Latin. They're trying to fix all this stuff themselves. And these are presidents of the United States. John Adams was the second. Jefferson's the third. It's just amazing. This is just amazing. They have this project. Okay, there will be found remaining the most sublime and benevolent code of morals which has ever been offered to man. I have performed this operation for my own use. And this is To Adams by Jefferson. I performed this operation for my own use by cutting verse by verse out of the printed book and arranging the matter which is evidently his and which is as easily distinguished as diamonds in a dunghill. The result is an octavo of 46 pages. And I just want to say is this small octavo was maybe for his primary use, different from the Bible, which he's doing by cutting and pasting. So maybe Throckmorton is looking at this quote and doesn't realize there's another book. There are two books. One's more extensive and has the cut out pages, and the other is his own private book. It would appear that from this that Jefferson made two such books, one a volume of 46 pages, which he later enlarged to the book which is here given. So I think it's unfortunate this introducer said it was enlarged, because I think that's what made Throckmorton think that whatever was his purpose of the small book should now be ascribed to the larger book. No, no, no. The small book was his little book for himself, and then the larger book was the book he wanted for the Indians, for evangelism, for other people to see. So then Throckmorton gets the wrong idea that, Jefferson's really just writing this for himself, and there's no evangelistic purpose at all. Maybe to make money, like he needs money. Okay, here we go. So now there's another complimentary statement about Jesus from Jefferson, so I thought I would include it. And again, in a letter to Charles Thompson, written in 1816, he writes, Jefferson does, I too have made a wee little book from the same materials which I call the philosophy of Jesus. It is a paradigm of his doctrines, made by cutting the text out of the book and arranging them on pages of a blank book in a certain order of time or subject. So that's that bigger version of the Bible that even has a title page put in or inset into it. It's not his little book, and it's the big book, and it has these blank pages still at one point in 1803, I think it was. And now he's filling it in regularly and trying to build a real book, a Bible out of it, of Jesus' words. And then he says this, Jefferson, a more beautiful or precious morsel of ethics I have never seen. It is a document in proof that I am a real Christian. That is to say, a disciple of the doctrines of Jesus. So my view as we get to the end here is, if he's willing to declare right there he's a Christian, then we have to take him at his word. He believes, I think he believes, as I do, is if you're following Jesus, how can you not be a Christian? Okay. So people say, oh, but you don't believe he's God. Well, he didn't believe himself as God, right? John 17, 1-3 says there's only one true God, and that's the Father. So if Jesus didn't believe he's God, I don't have to believe he's God. So the people use the wrong idea. The truth about being a Christian is, do you follow Christ? Oh, well, then that's just, you could follow Martin Luther King and you just happen to follow Jesus. No, we're obeying Yahweh of the universe. He sent the prophet. It's hard to talk to people who just never listen. So anyway, but all of us who are fans of Jesus' words only, meaning we follow Jesus as our sole pastor, our sole teacher, we respect other people. Of course, we Jesus directs us to Mosaic law and so on. So we have multiple authority, but Jesus is our central authority, and that's key. And there's a reason. To me, he's the ultimate. God sent the prophet for a reason. That's who he is, the prophet. Okay. In a letter dated April 25, 1816, written from Poplar Forest near Lynchburg, addressed to Mr. Vanderkemp, Jefferson gives further details. He writes, I made for my own satisfaction an extract from the evangelist of the text of his morals, selecting those only whose style and spirit proved them genuine and his own. So obviously this involves some subjectivity, but when you're trying to say to yourself, I can see the genius of a certain level, okay, and then you see a statement or expression that isn't worthy of Jesus, then you could decide to separate them. Okay, now I don't know if Jefferson did this, but my personal feeling is that there's something wrong with the story of the miracle at Cana. Jesus has just been baptized. He's just had the Holy Spirit come down on him, enter him. He's been born of God. God says from heaven, this day I've begotten you. And the first miracle he does is at his mother's request at a wedding for a rich guy who runs out of wine. And then, he needs more wine. And the son is asked by the mother, or implicitly asked by the mother, to do something. And then he does it. This is what I would call a horrible thing to ascribe to Jesus, because it just makes frivolous what he's doing. A miracle like that should be done for people who are suffering, who are lacking things, not needing a miraculous appearance of wine. People can drink water. So it just really offends me to think Jesus said that. So I wish it's not there. It's in the Bible, so I'm not going to say it doesn't belong until I do more research. But that's the kind of thing you have to say, hey, this is screwbally. That's not the Jesus I know. Is it the Jesus any of us knows? No. So that's wrong for Jesus to do, I think. But I'm not God, so I can't judge him, and I believe he's sinless. So the real answer here is it must be a corruption, and that's probably the kind of analysis that President Jefferson used, and that's not wrong, because we've had, unfortunately, Trinitarian corruptions. And now you'll say, why is that a Trinitarian corruption? Because it's the mother of God asking her son to do something. And that would suggest, if you were teaching that it's okay to pray to Mary, which is, if you've been raised Catholic, you're supposed to pray to Mary. You have our Hail Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. I memorized it since I was 6 years old. I still remember it. I'm 64 years old. I haven't said it for 59 years. I haven't said it. I could remember it on the spot right there. That's how ingrained it gets. You can pray to Mary. In fact, you're supposed to pray to Mary. And what is the message of Cana? You can ask Mary, because Mary has the in with Jesus. That's what that's all about. That cannot have been an originally in the Gospel of John. My view. It doesn't change anything, doesn't change theology. But if you're a believer in the Catholic Church, they believe you can ask Mary for things based on that passage. That's what they get out of it. You might not see that, but they see it. And when you're a kid, you're told that's the proof. Mary got Jesus to make wine. Boom. You need help. You need help at a wedding. Call Mary, and she'll get Jesus to make wine at your wedding too. That's what. Anyway, my point is this: he was making the right idea. Is there an incongruity between what you're seeing or being put in the words of Jesus and what's happening? And if it is an incongruity, and it's really clearly anything that's towards a deity position or Trinitarian position, that was the corrupting arm of the Catholic Church, ever since 325 because the state had a stake in Jesus being God. They wanted Jesus to be God because it matched the God they were actually promoting that we're never told about was God of the sun in the sky, Sol Invictus, a son of God who was also God the Son. The same thing as we had, but it was even more important than Jesus to Constantine and to all these corrupt emperors that we were dealing with. And we're never told that as Christians, what's really going on behind the scenes. And we have plenty of videos about Constantine. Just look him up, and you'll see he built a statue of himself 3 years after Nicaea, where he has his face in the statue of Apollo at Constantinople, where he has his head office. So yeah, there's so much corruption. But if it's anything else other than Trinity, you won't find a corruption. So that's the good thing. You could almost isolate all the corruptions are going to be to make it appear Trinitarian. And I'm sorry for you Trinitarians out there who are like some parts of our stuff here, you may not like hearing about Trinitarianism being so corrupt or corrupting, but it's just a fact. I mean, they had no ethics about changing the Bible to fit their doctrine as it was emerging, adding words that did not belong. But they can be exposed, and they have been exposed. So when that happens, you have to look at it and decide: do you want to follow something that's added in the 10th century, 12th century, and can be proven never existed before then? Well, we got a whole long laundry list of changes that were made. Fortunately, most of them had been removed because they were so obvious in the last 150 years. Anyway, I digress. Okay, so let's continue. Now, this is the belief system of Jefferson was summarized in the encyclopedia, the Jefferson Encyclopedia. It says Jefferson believed in the existence of a supreme being who was the creator and sustainer of the universe and the ultimate ground of being, but this was not the triune deity of Orthodox Christianity. So he's not a Trinitarian. He also rejected the idea of the divinity of Christ. He doesn't believe Jesus is God the Son. But as he writes to William Short on October 31, 1819, he was convinced that the fragmentary teachings of Jesus constituted the, quote, outlines of a system of the most sublime morality which has ever fallen from the lips of man. In correspondence, he sometimes expressed confidence that the whole country would be one day Unitarian, but he recognized the novelty of his own beliefs. On June 25, 1819, he wrote Ezra Stiles Ali, I am a sect by myself as far as I know. I think we're at the end. Okay. Now, here's where the recent opinion is scattered on this. Barton's recent work, The Jefferson Lies, portrays the Jefferson Bible as intended to summarize the just morality of Jesus and claims that otherwise Jefferson held to an orthodox evangelical view of the New Testament. He obviously also thought the works were intended to help the Indians. And the reason I say that is in response to Barton is Warren Throckmorton wrote a critique of various statements by Barton, disputing the historical claims that Jefferson was an evangelical Christian and creating the Jefferson Bible to evangelize Indians. So, yeah, Throckmorton is a respected scholar, but I think he's completely wrong. I showed you there's two references in that introduction that the purpose of the books were initially for the Indians. Now, it didn't mean he didn't have a personal reason for what he was doing. And the books are all published posthumously. So these books, as we see them now, are not, we don't know what his final introduction would have been. He was asking Dr. Rush to do the introduction, and Jefferson died before this was completed. The project was ever completed. So we'll never quite know 100%. All right. So anyway, I think that's it. The next episode here, we'll read some of the Bible. We'll take a look at it, see if there's anything we see different. Actually, it would be interesting to see what is not there. What did he therefore think was added or interpolated improperly? Okay, everybody. So God bless. I hope that helps, and I hope that helps my friend who asked me to do this. And what was his name again here? Let me just say thank you to him for suggesting the idea. Go all the way back to Johnny. So thanks, Johnny, for asking me to do this. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much. God bless everybody. Take care, Ciao. Bye.